Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome all of you to yet another edition of the Sunday webinar. And the topic this week is the road to enlightenment. I want to express my appreciation for all of you who have taken time to join us today. And I know that given all the things that must be consuming you and the many things that you need to do, it takes a tremendous amount of commitment to set aside the time to participate in a forum like this. And I'm profusely grateful to all of my beloved friends here who have joined us this afternoon. The title of today's webinar is rather pompous, isn't it? The Road to Enlightenment. And when you title something, The Road to Enlightenment, the presumption is that you are somebody who has attained to an enlightened state of consciousness. And that is why you deem yourself qualified to speak and arrogant enough to announce a title like The Road to Enlightenment. No, not at all. I'm somebody who tries to navigate every day on this road to enlightenment with a GPS. And I constantly take the wrong exits and make the wrong turns and end up retracing my way for hours. How many of you have taken a wrong exit at a critical point on a freeway and found that you have to drive back an hour to retrace your path and get back to your destination, to your course? The same thing happens to me almost every minute. So my declaration of the topic, announcing the topic, the road to enlightenment, doesn't any way imply that I'm making any kind of substantial or steady progress towards it. As I said, I have a great enthusiasm for sharing things that I've heard. And in that spirit, I'm trying to bring together a few insights on the road to enlightenment. So there are about 8 dimensions that I wanted to cover in today's webinar. But as you might well expect, that might be a lofty goal. To think that in 30 minutes I'd get through 8 of those seems like a lofty goal. So rather than say that I will cover all 8, I'll say there are 8 that I wanted to talk about, and let's see how many of them I'm able to actually get to. I was thinking of having a set of PowerPoint slides because they can be easier to keep track of. But the danger with PowerPoint is that it becomes so much information and it becomes a mind-based activity. It becomes an intellectual exercise. And I love the freedom of being able to speak to you from my heart, even though it might make for a much clumsier presentation. You know, I'm not seeking to make a neat, well-packaged and presented presentation, but rather to leave us with some thoughts of great mystics that might provoke each one of us in our own journey towards enlightenment. So let's also discard any idea that there is one road to enlightenment. There are perhaps as many roads to enlightenment as there are living beings in the world and sentient beings in the world. So it's for each one of us to discover our road. And if I put out these 8 dimensions here, it is only to provoke and stimulate greater search and inquiry on your part. I want to begin with the very first one, which is ego consciousness to ego transcendence. So it was the Buddha who talked about, apparently, that before enlightenment can be attained, there has to be something that has to be extinguished. Extinguishing must come before enlightenment. It's almost like how many of us have been in situations where we know that there's a higher level of consciousness we can ascend to, but that might mean we have to give up something. And often we are not willing to give up that which is in the way. And to Osho, one of the important things to give up is the flame of the ego. So he talks about how our ego leaves us with a false sense of our own importance and our significance. And it is a small light. It's like a tiny torch. And we are afraid to extinguish that small light of the ego, says Osho, because you fear that you might fall into a very deep darkness. But can you bring yourself to be so daring and so courageous to extinguish that small light of the ego, not knowing that there are no guarantees that there will be a vast sense of luminousness that will be there? You take that leap, you extinguish the small light of the ego in the trust that something much more luminous will appear. And it's almost as if, you know how when you turn off the light in the room, there's an immediate sense of overwhelming darkness that envelops you. So it is when you extinguish the small light of the ego, says Osho. There's an instantaneous set of experience of darkness. But how many of you have noticed that when you just continue to stay with the darkness, all of a sudden your eyes begin to adjust and you begin to see more light in the room, even in a dark room. So it is when you extinguish your ego, that there is an instantaneous explosion, if you will, of darkness that envelops you and surrounds you. But if you don't fear that, you will begin to see that your eyes will adapt and there will be a much deeper light that will begin to glow. So the first step in the road to enlightenment, if you will, and I just want to reference two books that I'm drawing from today. One of them that I was really so ecstatic to read is called The Secret by Osho. And I know that there are many different books that are titled The Secret. This one is called The Secret by Osho. I found it phenomenally inspiring to me, as I always love his writings. And of course, the other one, which I always recommend, is one of Osho's smallest books, Meditation for Busy People, Stress Beating Strategies for People with No Time to Meditate. So one of the first steps, baby steps in the road to enlightenment, is that we have deepened our awareness of times when we are in the grip of our own ego. And we are slowly becoming aware of how our ego is not liberating us, but it's actually imprisoning us. How do we see our ego? We see it only in those times when we want to be right about something, when we want to make others wrong. And how to dissolve it? Well, to create relationships that are so full of trust that people feel comfortable talking to you about your blind spot, talking to you about your weaknesses, and you feel encouraged and courageous to ask them, to get feedback, so that you are not afraid of the bad news, so-called bad news that may be there about yourself. Many of us fear discovering that we are selfish, possessive, controlling, because we don't see that such knowledge can actually liberate us. Because when we can see those aspects of ourselves that we are trying to hide in the basement, it, it is possible to do so in a space of deep self-acceptance, to not condemn ourselves for being possessive, controlling, dominating, but to accept ourselves for who we are. And on that bed of self-acceptance, it's possible to be able to engage with and process the bad news that we may be able to see about ourselves. And I say bad in quotation marks because no news about us is really bad. Anything that gets us more powerfully connected to other people and able to see things about us that we are trying to suppress is always good news. We recognize the wisdom of the empty boat. The Empty Boat is another book by Osho that talks about how if you're relaxing on a boat in the water and another boat hits you, you're suddenly jolted and perhaps you fall off, to the floor of your own boat, and you're mad at whoever it was that was so careless to come and jolt your boat and to hit your boat. You stand up ready to cuss, and you discover, for example, that the other boat is completely empty. What happens to your anger? You're not able to discharge it on another individual, and very quickly it dissipates. But if the other boat has an individual who's driving it, a confrontation and an angry confrontation might ensue between you and the other person. The moral of the story of this poem, The Empty Boat, is that many of us are going through life with our boat full of us. And that symbolizes the person with a big ego. Whereas if you empty your boat, which is the metaphorical equivalent of transcending your ego, it is that the resistance that the universe presents will be much less and the waters will open up for you to travel forth. So that's again brings us to the metaphor of the wave and the ocean, right? That the wave might be a superbly spectacular phenomenon, but it's only in the depth of the wave that the power of the ocean is realized. And the ego functions like a blindfold in our eyes. And for example, the sun is out today for a change. How many of you have noticed that the sun is shining even though it's cold and there is snow outside? But if I'm sitting outside with dark glasses, I'm not going to be able to notice the sun. And this is what the ego does to us most of the time. We are not able to notice the sun. We don't, the ego acts like a blindfold on our eyes. The sun rises, but for us, we remain in darkness. We don't hear the music, says Osho, because we have closed off our ears. We may be sitting in an ocean of love, but our heart may not be functioning. How many of us have been in situations when we are talking to somebody, expressing our love, and we get the feeling that for some reason they're filtering that love out? We have all had those painful moments where we express love only to discover that for whatever reason, the other person doesn't seem to be ready at that point to absorb the love that you have for them. And so Osho says life seems like a long and arduous journey. It feels like we are wandering miles and miles through the desert. Why? Because we have closed our eyes, closed our ears, and closed our heart. So the beauty of the universe, the enchanting beauty of the universe, we don't see the sun because we travel around with a blindfold. And it is only a deep gratefulness that can help us open our eyes to the beauty of the world, the enchanting beauty of the trees, the greenness of the trees. It is only a gratitude that can help open our ears to the enchanting music of the universe, whether it's the birds singing or your friends talking, their voices. All of that is the beautiful music of the universe. And the heart, when our hearts are closed, no matter how much love somebody pours on us, if we are not going to be capable of receiving it. The next dimension we want to talk about is from the valley of knowledge to the peaks of wisdom. So one of the first things that happens when we start making progress on the autobahn of enlightenment, if you will, is that we begin to know the difference between knowledge and wisdom. And this is something that I believe that the modern world is paying a heavy price for because it has lost this distinction. And many of our institutions of higher education have become so occupied with peddling knowledge that they have really not paid the same level of attention to wisdom. Now, what is the difference between knowledge and wisdom? Wisdom enables you to go beyond the surface level labels of any phenomenon. Reality is very complex. It's in so many different dimensions. You can see reality from one dimension, it looks a certain way. You can take a deeper look, reality can look so totally different. The same situation can look so different, not just to different people, but to you based upon your inner state. If I'm in a loving state, the argument that I'm having with somebody, I will experience very differently than if I'm in a state of anger or ingratitude or something like that. So when we go beyond labels, we understand the difference between knowledge and experience. For example, and reality, for example, if we are immersed in knowledge, we might read from a textbook that there are 5, 6, or 7 oceans, and we might do a diligent job of memorizing them. But when we have awakened to wisdom, we know there is only one ocean, and man may have made up 5 labels, but there is only one ocean. Similarly, as Osho reminds us, we understand that the whole idea of a nation is a socially constructed reality. Humanity is one, and then man created and have drawn lines that separate us. So we are able to see between the beyond the socially constructed distinctions. And this is something that is very important because knowledge often involves making distinctions. You know, always we make distinctions, whereas spiritual wisdom involves dissolving the distinctions. In knowledge, you become more knowledgeable about many different things. In wisdom, you awaken to the overwhelming sense of cosmic oneness and the interdependence of all beings, of nature, of animals, of human beings. We begin to recognize that my inner sky and my inner life is no different than yours. We are all enjoying the same common shared experience of being a human being, although we might experience those realities differently. We are also then able to see beyond the man-made dictionary generated distinctions of antonyms and synonyms. We recognize that the very people that we love, we may also hate it sometimes, that love and hate are not necessarily incompatible. We recognize that peaks and valleys, as I'm fond of saying, are joined, they're not opposites. Every peak becomes a valley, and the valley experiences in life that we have plenty of are given not by the shape or the contour, but they're given by our attitude towards it. If I start roasting samosas and singing to my favorite songs, that valley has been transformed into a peak. More importantly, what distinguishes knowledge from wisdom is a sense of humor. You find yourself laughing heartily at yourself and the foolishness of an overly serious world. Think about it, folks. How is it possible for any of us to not burst out laughing at our own lives, at the foolishnesses that we have succumbed to, and we are continuing to succumb to, at the foolishnesses of others, not in a mean way, but in noticing the comedy of human existence. You know, one of the cosmic jokes we talk about is that each of us is trying to prove to ourselves and to others that we are unique, special, and extraordinary, forgetting that we are already being created unique, special, and extraordinary. There's no human being like us anywhere on the planet. Imagine me at 59 trying to work so hard to impress you and to prove to you that I'm unique and special, without awakening to the simple realization that there is no human being like me. That which I'm seeking and expending so much energy towards is something that all life has already given me. So it is. And part of the journey towards wisdom is awakening to the understanding that everything that I'm seeking from life, I go around life with a begging bowl. I ask my wife, give me love. I ask my colleagues, give me recognition. I ask the universe,
You're still muted.
I'm so sorry, I was coughing, so I thought out of politeness, I'd mute myself, and then I continued to stay muted. Actually, it might have led to a more profoundly spiritual seminar had I just continued to stay muted for the remaining time, because then we would have been enveloped by the silence in which each of us would have discovered our own road to enlightenment, as opposed to listening to some prefabricated formulas that Param is peddling in this talk, right? So we preserve our own sense of humor and our ability to and I forgot what I was saying before I tried to cough, so I guess we let it go unless somebody quickly remembers the path I was on. It was something about distinguishing wisdom and what happens when you become wise as opposed to knowledgeable.
You were saying that you ask others for what you need. You ask your wife for love, and then you...
Right. Thank you so much. Thanks for rescuing me from my own foibles here. I might keep asking, but I might forget that whatever it is that I'm asking for from the outside is available to me inside. It is because I may not have taken the time to know myself that I want to be well known in the world. It is because I don't love myself that I might go to other people with a begging bowl asking for love. And therefore, it is the awakening. Wisdom leads to the awakening that nature has created us with the full capacity to be whole and complete. And if we awaken to that, we stop feeling this inner emptiness, because in the presence of this inner emptiness, we keep asking the universe to grant us these things that we think we are devoid of. And the very act of asking is actually deepening our inner emptiness, because if I'm begging, I must not have any. So it takes away attention from the richness and the abundance that I carry. And this is one of the things that I've had to confront in this day and age. I'm beginning to take a hard look at how, despite all these talks and seminars on highfalutin topics, deep down, I have a sense of emptiness, that I'm not good enough, that I'm not worthwhile, that I'm trying to fulfill. And for me to become aware of this could itself be the first step towards liberation. The third dimension that I want to talk about is seeing differently. And we have alluded to this in some of the previous webinars, and I want to add a few dimensions to it. That we talked about how we often go to a movie and we take that movie to be real life, and we get so engrossed in it and agitated when the plot of the movie goes into areas that we don't really wish to happen. So you get very emotionally involved with James Bond or the Titanic sinking. Seeing differently means you're able to see your life as a movie. So at every step, when something catastrophic even happens, or you think is catastrophic, you have perspective. You recognize that it has just made the movie of your life and the plot of the play, the existential cosmic play you're in, a little more richer and a little more interesting, even though it might be accompanied with some level of pain. So, for example, Houston Smith in his book World Religions talks about how when a small child drops his ice cream, it is the ultimate tragedy. He is broken, he's heartbroken, he is crying for the longest time. And he says that in many ways we remain children. So when we are 59, we start crying like that and sobbing like that, not necessarily when we drop our ice cream cone, but when we get divorced, we get to, lose a job, or when any of these experiences happen. But notice, says Houston Smith, it's not another child that can comfort him, because the other child is also at the same level as this child and sees the same reality. An adult who gets a different perspective on life can comfort this child and say, hey, don't worry, the ice cream truck will come back and I can get you a different ice cream. Can we be that to ourselves? Can we exist at multiple levels, at the level at which we are experiencing the harshness and the brutality of the world, but also be a seer, a witness, an observer, watching this unfold and seeing in yourself how we take the setbacks in our life and magnify them into tremendous tragedies. Another aspect of seeing things differently we've already talked about is the Vuja Day experience, right? Deja vu is where you go through an experience and you feel you have had this experience before. It's a vague, intuitive sense of feeling. The Vuja Day is where, Adam Grant talks about it in his videos, but I think it was some other writer who first popularized it, where you're able to see something that you've seen 1,000 times before, but you're able to cleanse your eyes and you see it like you're seeing it for the first time. What a different experience of life. My friend Terry Martin, who's on the call here, is a artistic photographer. And he looks at a bird and I see, what's great about that, Terry? It's just another bird. But the eyes that Terry brings when he captures the photographic cinematic beauty of that bird, he's looking at that bird with eyes as if he's seeing that beautiful bird for the very first time in his life. And that's what is meant by seeing things anew, seeing things differently. And if we are capable of doing that, there's a corollary to that, which means we also have developed the muscle that enables us to die to the past. So how very often what we are seeing in a situation is not the freshness of the situation. It's all the accumulated dirt and dust from traveling through life that we are carrying that has covered our lenses. Seeing things afresh means you have to take off those lenses, wipe them clean, and put them on, and you have a freshness of perspective. By the way, I want to remind all of you before I forget that my cleveland.com op-ed piece will be out by now or in another half an hour. So please Google it and take a look. It is titled That One Person You Just Can't Stand in Your Life. It's a universal problem. I want you to share it with people because, when we talk about loving people, loving humanity, these are very big words and phrases. How many of you can see that when we say love humanity, we don't know what to do? But when we can see, how about we identify that one person we can't stand in our life? And regardless of whether you will do anything with that relationship or not, you will read a 3-minute op-ed piece that gives you a different perspective on that one relationship. And if each of us could do that, can you imagine how many flowers of love will bloom? Because our hearts get blocked with hate and with dislike and animosity. And you can see at this time in our life, our country is so deeply divided. And we find it almost impossible to converse with people who have a different political or environmental or social ideology. And for us to be able to see the sacredness of every human being and to be able to separate out the issues from the human being, to recognize and experience a human being, and to understand what might be fueling this hate that we are having. And that is why I wrote this piece. And I didn't call the op-ed piece Transforming Hate into Love or something like that, because it's very abstract. Nobody can relate it to it. I wanted to point the piece very specifically at a universal experience that most of us have, that one person you just can't stand, and put together some distilled wisdom from the multiple wisdom traditions on how we can reframe those relationships. So I would encourage you not just to read it, but to help circulate that if you believe that that article has some value and you believe that it can help light a few candles of love in the world, a few candles of compassion so badly needed. The next dimension that we're going to talk about is embracing mystery as possibility. So there's a lot of misunderstandings, says Osho, in The Secret. It's a very beautiful book. There's a chapter on mysticism where he says, mysticism is merely the declaration that life is not logic. How many of you can see that if you just approach life logically, there's so much that is illogical in life that you might just miss? Life is poetry. Life is music. And the scientist, says Osho, divides the world into two bifurcations. One, the world of the known and the world of the unknown. And the whole enterprise of modern science is to keep increasing the area of the known, to keep increasing knowledge. So gradually the area of the unknown keeps shrinking to the point that in a utopian reality, nothing remains unknown because every mystery has been explored and expressed and analyzed and all of that. That is the vision of science, to have this progressive increase in knowledge to be able to shrink the level of mystery. Whereas the mystic believes that life cannot be divided into the known and the unknown, says Osho. Life has to be very divided into the known, the unknown, and the unknowable. So that no matter how much your knowledge increases, you will recognize that there is something sacred to life that is completely unknowable, that is not accessible through knowledge. And I'm not necessarily talking about great, I don't know, psychic truths and mysteries and miracles. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something very simple: the truth of music, the truth of poetry, the truth of art. These are not things that can be necessarily reduced to knowledge. They're so experiential. Osho reminds us that when the river disappears into the ocean, it does not know the ocean, it becomes the ocean. There is a very big difference between becoming something and knowing something. When you know something, you have to stand separate from it. Knowing, as Sumi reminded us some sessions ago, presupposes an object and a subject. The subject is trying to know the object. When the knower and the object disappear, then that is when the river doesn't exist as a separate river. It becomes the ocean. It doesn't come to know the ocean. And in life, we have these deep experiences that cannot be understood to knowledge, in terms of knowledge, when the lover disappears into his or her beloved. When the raindrop disappears into the ocean, it becomes the ocean. There is no division, and that is a very different way of celebrating mystery. Now, there are 4 epistemological quadrants. What is epistemology? It is, how do you know what you know? And many of you know that there are 4 dimensions to life. Epistemology reminds us that there are, and all of them are worthy of being celebrated. One of them consists of the things that you know that you know. That's knowledge. One of them consists of the things that we know that we don't know. And it's very important to be aware of that, because in so many situations, and I cannot tell you how many times I feel I know what's going on in somebody. I know what's going on in a relationship, in a situation, and I'm repeatedly proved wrong. Because often I will say, this is my experience of the situation and I know it. Well, says Osho, the first thing to awaken to is to know that what you think is your experience is nothing other than your chattering monkey. It is your mind. Your mind concocts stories and tells you this is your experience. So if you've not cultivated the capacity to question your own mind, you will forever be at the mercy of your chattering monkey. Self-doubt is what enables you to transcend. Too often we are very good at questioning other people's minds, but we are very bad at questioning our own mind. And that is indeed one of the challenges, to be able to celebrate the power of doubt as a source of light rather than as a source of darkness. So there are things that we know that we don't know. And then there are things that we don't know that we know. There's much knowledge that we have. We may not even know we have it, but it's so intuitive and deep. And of course, the area to be celebrated the most, the mystery of the universe, the things that we don't know, the knowing of which could make such a big difference to the quality of experience. For example, for so many years in my life, I have been run by patterns of behavior, and perhaps even now, patterns of behavior about me. And that is the hidden part of what the psychologists call the Johari window. And there are so many such patterns, and I don't even know that I don't know that those patterns exist. So, how can I bring a level of humility to know that no matter how much self knowledge I might have, I will always remain a vast ocean that can only be discovered? I can take handfuls of water from the ocean and drink it, but the vastness of my being is so immense, it's the ocean. To be in a sacred, respectful relationship to my own being, saying, I don't know who I am fully. I've probably seen 1/10 of it, and 9/10 of me is in darkness. Notice that our chattering monkey tells us we know who we are because it makes up stories about who we are based on previous experiences. But that is the mind has invented an image of who you are. That is very different, says Osho, from your real self. So Osho distinguishes between an invented self, which is invented by your mind. It tells me I'm a kind person, generous person, whatever it is, and a discovered self, which is a self, says Osho, that you don't invent, but you discover. You already have it within you. It might get covered with dust, but you discover that. That is your uh, original face when all the masks have disappeared. To be able to see that deepest self beyond all the masks that we are wearing. But too often, we comfort ourselves with the voice of the chattering monkey that tells us who we are, that has a neat narrative to be who we are. But who we are is not given by our mind, it is also given by our heart. It is also given by our being. Who I'm being in a situation may be very different than my self image coming out of my invented self of who I am. So, one of the signs of progress on the path, on the road to enlightenment, is constantly dealing with this duality between the invented self and the discovered self. Am I willing to discover who I am, even when that implies a shadow side? And finally, the last point is to just remind us about embracing ourselves as a mystery. So we can look at ourselves through the eyes of a businessman. I can evaluate my skills and say, what will I be capable of earning, producing? I can look at myself through the lens of a scientist, constantly analyzing my behavior. I can look at myself through the eyes of an artist and see myself as a masterpiece, see in my own life a beautiful novel, see in my own life a poem that is being written every day. Or I can awaken to the experience of myself as an infinite mystery that can never be fully known. On that note, folks, I'm going to be stopping the recording. As for those of us who have been on these sessions before, you know that there are two parts. One part is where I deliver some material and we pause and then we interact around some questions and answers. And if you feel moved to stay, please stay. We love to have you stay, because how many of you have noticed that richer things have been said by our participants in conversation than in the main session itself? For me, the best part is when I hear people relating these to their experiences and sharing their stories. So you're welcome to stay, but I understand you might have other commitments and you might need to go. So if you do need to go, please, by all means, don't feel compelled or pressured to stay. That would be okay. And we wish you good luck. And if you want to be on my mailing list, please do send me an email. If you're already there, that's fine. We will see you next Sunday. And for those of you who want to stay, please stay as long as you wish. No particular level of pressure. So at this point, I will be stopping the recording. So any of you who have comments or questions, don't feel like you're going to be suddenly projected on a YouTube channel without your consent. So may the love be with you. And I'm going to stop the